I'm Andy Green, and welcome to the Naked Man Podcast.
Around Y2K, when I was enjoying all puberty had to offer, I spent several hours every night on AOL Instant Messenger under the screen name Spiffy Guy, GY. GUY was taken. I roamed chat rooms and struck up conversations with random strangers, often pretending to be older, sometimes female, or even from other parts of the world. I had different names, I had girlfriends, I cybered with God knows who, I explored with who I was and wasn't in this new frontier of the internet. I talked more with my online friends than I did with my real-life friends. I shared more with them, too. It was easier. It was safer. I found people who shared the same passions I did, who also felt isolated and lonely. After the X-Men movie in 2000, I swapped out my Pokemon cards for comic books. I joined the Marvel.com message boards as Dr. Doom 2099 and spent what money I had on comic books and what time I had online with my similarly obsessed friends, which includes this week's guest. He goes by the moniker Goki, the origins of which will be explained shortly. Goki and I met on the Marvel message boards. There was a role-playing forum that I jumped into without having any idea what I was talking about or what I was doing, and Goki immediately reached out and gave me pointers. Goki has always been my comics and internet steward. Along with our pal Avenging Angel 214, we would talk every night about the comics we were reading, the movies and shows we were watching, sometimes even about personal stuff, hatching imaginary futures where we would all meet in person, relishing in our geekdom. At some point, I created a message board of my own called Comic Castle, where Goki was one of the founding members and became a long-standing moderator and shepherd for new members into the community. Goki is and was always the best of us, the kindest, the goofiest, the pepsiest, the most willing to take part in whatever project or fanciful idea AA and I had. We role-played together, we wrote reviews together, we blogged together. Goki was always generous with his knowledge, teaching me about the vast comic book lore I didn't know. Goki helped make this new and unfamiliar world feel safe and magical, one I far preferred from high school. Of course, like with many friends, we grew up. We went to college. Marvel became the most popular IP in the world instead of something I felt ashamed of loving. The internet changed. We changed. But thanks to Facebook, we never lost contact. Goki became and Spiffy became Andy. This week, we travel back to a simpler time for an exploration of our life online and the experimentation with our identities therein. This week, Goki and I see each other in the flesh for the first time. Goki has always been the trusty and responsible gatekeeper for this time in our lives. He is the protector, the Heimdall character that will help propel us across the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that will deliver us back to our own personal Asgard. Goki, welcome back to Comic Castle. Welcome to the Naked Man Podcast.
Wow, it is great to be here. I guard the Bifrost. Oh, man. Top that. Jeez. That was great. I love that intro.
Thank you. I loved writing it. I loved thinking about it. I love this theme. Thank you. We're both cooler than I thought we were.
Yeah. I think it took a while for me to become this cool. You know? Some coolness is innate within you, and some of it you've got to learn. You know what I mean?
I'm just trying to learn from you, Goki. That's where I'm at.
Thanks. I feel like back in the day, I was like learning from you. I was learning from like you and like AA. You guys were hip, like compared to me. You know what I mean? Totally. I was totally behind the curve on everything. You were reading all the cool comics. I was like reading X-Men and some other stuff, and it took me a while to catch up to you guys.
I guess with everything, if I'm really into it, I just jump into it and I don't even know what I'm doing, right? Dr. Doom 2099. I've still never read Dr. Doom 2099.
What? Really?
Yeah, I just thought it was cool. Yeah.
It is cool and he looks cool.
That was the only, 13-year-old reason I needed was like, but I still have never read the Doom 2099 series. So there we go. That's my first reveal that everyone has been waiting to hear.
That is the first stripping down to naked moment we're having on this episode.
One article of clothing is off. Okay, yeah. The helmet behind Dr. Doom. You can see my scarred face.
Exactly. Our listeners, or should I say our voyeurs, are excited, I'm sure.
Well, Goki, how are you feeling in this moment?
How am I feeling? I'm feeling actually, I don't want to be cliche, but I am feeling good. I'm super excited we're doing this. Like, since you told me, since you asked me to do this, I have been like building it up in my head, rehearsing things I could say. I am stoked and things in life are good. You know, I'm vaccinated.
Congratulations.
Yes. You know, it's amazing how different you feel after you get vaccinated and you realize how much stress you were under, you know, before getting the shots.
It feels like armor, right? It feels like the Doom armor. It feels like I have some power that I didn't before.
Oh my gosh.
We will all be wearing armor because we can't breathe or touch each other, or else we'll all die like pretty much immediately. That's
Doom is the future. You heard it here. Doom was ahead of the curve. Nobody cares. Okay, Reed was wrong. Reed Richards was wrong. Dr. Doom had it right.
I feel the same. I always get nervous for, you know, anything like this. Doesn't matter how many times I do it. Doesn't matter who it is on the, like, it could be, I was going to say my mom, but like, I think that would actually make me even more nervous. I don't know, like, cause it's just, I don't know. I just want it to be fun and good. And then like, I think the second I saw you, I was like, oh, this is going to be fun and good. Like,
likewise. I mean, I already knew. I mean, like, just having known you so long and what we're going to talk about, right? Getting to know the real you, your personality, your essence without a lot of your personal details. Like, I already knew this is going to be great.
I think that's the whole thing, is that there was this illusion that maybe we were different people, you as Goki, me as Spiffy or Doom, you know, like that was like somehow, yeah, it wasn't us. But like you said, I think the essence is there. And I feel like I just felt the essence. I was like, even though I know what you look like now, but because that would have been, I think, a bigger shock, right? Like, it was just like, whoa,
he looks kind of like me, but with worse hair. Jeez.
Is that the description?
That's your description for me, not mine of you. For the record.
Thanks.
That would have been so mean. But yeah, Andy, you know, I hate to break it to you, but if we're being honest on this podcast, no.
I like that you said it'd be so mean, but you said that's what I'm thinking. So I'm...
Yeah, no, you're not. No. Of course not. No, but seriously, you always came off as like the nicest, coolest dude. No hyperbole.
Oh, I thought the same thing of like you and David, who's AA, Avenging Angel 214. Hopefully, if he's listening, hi, David.
Hi, David. If you don't like my voice, don't tell me.
I love your voice, Goki. We should have been doing this way earlier.
I know.
You were terrified to do it. At least I know I was. I know you were, and I guess are more private and probably more mistrustful of the internet, and for good reason. I think that was sort of proven why.
Yes. Our listeners / voyeurs should know how many times we talked about what names we're going to use on here. We always knew Andy was going to be Andy Green, Spiffy Dude, full disclosure. But me, it was like, I'm just going to dip half my toe in the water. You know, and part of that comes from like my upbringing. My mom loves crime shows. She used to, at least. She sometimes still does now, but she used to watch like crime shows all the time and like read like, you know, the crime stuff in the news. So she'd always be like, hey, honey, did you hear about so-and-so who like got hacked to pieces last night? I'm like, no, I didn't. It's like, I was 2 states away. You better be careful. I'm like, oh, okay.
2 states. She told a random stranger her first name, you know?
And that was it. That was the end of it, you know? Like, so my mom was always like, listen, if you're online, don't ever tell anybody your real name. Don't tell them your age. Don't tell them where you're from. Don't tell them your ASL.
Look at you. We were supposed to do that at the beginning here. Well, what is your ASL? And you can do it as if your mom is watching or listening.
Mom, I'm 34. Sex is male. Location, and for you, Mom, I will say this, is simply East.
I am about to be 33 in 2 days, but we'll still say 32, male. And I realize that ASL is very it's very binary, like it doesn't, it's outdated. And then location right now, Glendale, California.
Woo! Go Glendale!
We did it. Glendale and East. We don't know where East, but that's where Goki is. He's always been East in my heart. Always 3 hours ahead of me, Goki. You always know something.
This is true. The fact that he's told you my time zone now gives you an extra clue, huh? Oh. So eagle-eared listeners.
Oh, no.
It's okay. I mean, that doesn't narrow it down. It takes a few countries out and a few continents, but it doesn't narrow it down that much.
Oh, man, I'm going to blow up your spot for sure in this episode. Oh, man. I think your mom was smart for saying that and for being cautious on the internet, because God knows who we were talking to most of the time, right? Yeah. And I think, what would you say, I want to say a couple years, I think, before I came clean in terms of how old I was with you and Dave and with everyone. I think it was sort of, you feel out and you can sort of eventually tell that you're around the same age. You're like, oh, okay. I won't really embarrass myself when I say that I'm 14, but I remember, I think for a couple times, I would always still say a year or two older, just in case. And then I think maybe you would say something else, and then I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm actually this age. Oh, thank God.
Believe it or not, with me, you actually told me really early on. I don't even remember. I don't know if it was the Marvel message boards, which is where we met, by the way. Yeah, I just knew so early that I always knew that you were a year younger.
I always felt like the young, I guess I was the young one of the three of us, but it also we were interacting with people that were in their 20s and 30s, right?
Yeah.
And that was in a way the first group of adults that I interacted with that weren't family. Was that the same for you?
Yeah, it was I think I in general have always gotten along pretty well with adults, but it was the first time I talked to an adult a peer. They were somebody who I knew for school or something like that, for example. It's amazing how those boundaries online, even if they tell you your age, those boundaries online just aren't as strong, and they feel somebody more your age range. It's weird.
I was going to ask you, what brought you to AIM and Marvel in particular, I guess?
Back when we started, before there was really Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, blah, 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 Microsoft Edge, whatever, Firefox, there was AOL, America Online, which was the quote-unquote browser. So easy to use, no wonder it's number one. Goki was my AOL name, because my dad was like, hey, you kids should have your own accounts now, so I did that, and I used to visit DC Comics and MarvelComics.com every single day, especially because I couldn't read a lot of comics growing up. My mom in particular was a little kind of I don't know if you should be reading comics, you should be reading books. It was the X-Men movie in 2000 that changed my mom's mind. But anyway. Sorry,
I was just saying that's a big movie in your life then too, the X-Men 2000 movie.
Yeah, it was validation. My mom was like, man, this is great. This Hugh Jackman with the claws is awesome. Comics are cool. Finally, that got me into a comic store. But yeah, before then, I'd go to Marvel.com and DC.com, and I'd just read all the information. I'd read the solicitations, which for people who don't know are the little descriptions of comics that are coming out. And one day, I saw that Marvel.com had opened its own message boards, and that's how I got in it.
And I guess I did the same. Clearly I just wanted to find people to talk about comics with, because it was this new obsession. And this was before, I feel nerd was a bad thing back then, and being a geek, or at least I wasn't comfortable enough to be me, I wasn't going to be carrying my Beanie Babies into school, or whatever it was. Or I guess Pokemon, though, that was pretty ubiquitous. Everybody
was into Pokemon until they suddenly super hated it. And anybody who liked Pokemon was a nerd, a dweeb, and an undesirable.
Yeah, that might have made me be oh, okay, yeah, Pokemon isn't cool anymore. They're right.
Exactly.
But then the X-Men movie reminded me how much I liked X-Men the animated series. And that arcade game, as a kid. And it sort of was oh, this is what I, want to, jump and spend all my money on. I was staying up late for me. So who knows, for you, how you got any sleep. It felt every day, I want to say, maybe we take a day or two off. How many, 3 to 5 hours a day almost, it felt just talking, not always intensive. It was sort of we can pick up and leave off while we
leave the house or,
Right. That would have been nice. We couldn't really leave the house. It's 3 a.m, right?
Yeah. It was the thing. Like, I know that I would just log on at various points of the day, but like it was addictive too. Just the mere act of being part of an online community, because you're always checking to see if you got new posts, right? Which nowadays is new texts.
I realized that this is where the writing started for me, right? And it sounds like for you too. And I don't think I knew that. It's sort of, I was just having fun. Well, even the conversations we would write to each other, that was the best education I think I could have. Because I think for me, especially, this time was a time of sort of figuring out who I was, or at least I was definitely more myself. Spiffy was more Andy than Andy in high school, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Is that the same for you? Were you more under wraps, or were you the same, sort of goofy, fun-loving Goki in school?
Well, it's a conflict story, I guess. When I was younger, I was very kind of quiet or introverted. And then when I became 14, just a little before the Marvel message boards opened up, that's when I'm like, I don't get it. I'm not shy at home. I'm always joking around with my family. Why can't I bring my home self to school? And that's when I made my big push. And, for the rest of that year, in the 9th grade, like, it was like a whole new world had opened up. And I made tons of friends, and I was so happy. Online Goki is an extension of that, but I guess even more uninhibited.
So it sounds like actually then you maybe didn't have this sort of dual thing going. Like, it's sort of, I guess I was going to ask, did you keep your passions for comics and the Batman animated series and stuff like that? Was that under wraps, or was that something you were like a proud badge that you wore?
Early on, when I was more introverted, I would keep quiet. Sometimes I'd bring a comic to school, but I'd kind of like go to a corner and read it. But once I became more extroverted and people like really responded well to that or whatever, I would sometimes, at this point I was buying comics, I would bring comics to school, my stacks. People were like, oh, you like comics? Cool. And this was, of course, right when X-Men was coming out, when Spider-Man was coming out. So the perception of comics, and or at least the characters, was starting to change.
Yeah, I feel like I definitely didn't have that confidence. And I think a lot of it was imagined. Like, I think if I had just owned it, but it felt like, to me, AIM was the only place where I felt like I could do it, And I think it wasn't until my moment of like sort of the blossoming of Andy, I guess, was senior year of high school. And I think that also sort of coincided with, I think, a lot less, message boards and AIM. I guess it was just the senior year thing of like, oh, who cares anymore?
Exactly. And this is a surprise for me to hear, because you came off to me the same way you described me just now, as a person who's just very funny, like very witty, very sharp, like I thought that was you all the time. Which it was, but like there was like you were more afraid to show it in public. Yeah,
I definitely was. It was sort of, I think my high school self was always afraid of making a decision about who I was.
Right.
It felt like you had to be like a certain part of the clique. You had to be something. You had to be the jock. You had to be the goth or whatever, which is nonsense. But it sort of felt like I never felt like I belonged in any sort of those. I sort of wanted to blur the edges of all those, like even sort of the nerds or like the IB kids. I was a partial IB person and everyone was full, and it was sort of like, I think everything that I've been, I've sort of always been that in between. I think online it didn't feel like that, and especially like I think it was so much easier to pretend to be someone else. Like, I think I was pretty much the same person with you and David, but like on other interactions I could be Patrick. I could create characters. I could be. And I know I did that, and it was fun. But like, it doesn't strike like that you did that. Did you do that?
No. And I think it was probably the fact that it coincided with that moment where I'm like, I'm going to be myself the way, I'm going to be how I was at home in public, and that it ended up being who I am in public, ended up being what I am online. Just feeling that confidence about myself at the time, I didn't feel the need to like pretend to be somebody else. Although I was on the receiving end of that. I'll tell a little story. And I'm not going to say the person's name or their handle. Instead, I'm going to use Star Wars pseudonyms.
Okay.
So later on, we're going to talk about this soon. Like, I got into online role playing, and I was on a DC superhero one. And there was a person there who went by the name of, again, Star Wars pseudonyms, not the actual name, Leia. Right? And Leia told us she was a girl. She was super funny, super energetic, very bouncy off the wall humor, and we in addition to the board, we had this AIM chat room, which in theory was for us to discuss story ideas, but it was just us clowning around. So she very much became a part of that chat, she was one of us, we came to trust her and everything. And one day, and I don't remember if she wrote to me privately or if it was in the chat, she said, "Hey, listen, there's something you should know." I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "I'm not really Leia." I'm like, "Okay." And she's like, "I'm not a girl either." I'm like, "Okay." And she's like, "I'm Han." It was surprising, but and then Han goes on to explain to me. He's like, "Listen, I one day I thought I'd try pretending to be Leia and try pretending to be a woman, and everybody seemed to like me better, so I kept doing it." And hearing this, I was kind of heartbroken. I was thinking, this poor guy, my friend, felt the need to pretend to be somebody else because he thought people would accept him more that way. So right away, I let him know, it's like, it doesn't matter whether you're Han or you're Leia or you're male or you're female. I've gotten to know the real you this past year, and as Mr. Rogers would say, I like you just the way you are.
Oh man, Goki, that was an amazing story.
Yeah.
I think that's the lesson of it, right? Is that we did know who we were, the sort of superficial, how old we were, even our names, the gender, sex, whatever we identified with. And maybe Han was experimenting with that in his life as well.
Exactly.
And I think that was what was so cool about it. It did feel like there was freedom and no judgment when you found the right people, of course. I think it was with David and maybe you, or I guess you said that I told you my age really early, or maybe I was very obvious, but I feel like I had that moment with David early on. I was like, I'm actually 14, don't hate me, And he was just like, I'm actually 15, don't hate me, It was just like...
That's so great, because, that conversation could have happened with somebody 3 times your age at a cafe with evil intentions,
I think that's what everyone is thinking, or when saying that I'm talking to people in chat rooms, it's like, oh my God, that's dangerous, or that's horrible. But it was also I felt safe, even though I knew there was weird people in there. This it's probably easier for me to say this now, but it almost felt like a safe way to encounter predators in a way. You could notice the people, and I could learn oh, okay, stay away from this person or not trust this person. It was sort of I was learning that internet language early, I guess.
Oh, totally. And with my mom having ingrained this need to be cautious, it made it sort of easy to identify these people, because you never give out too much information, but then you start to realize when somebody's acting a little weird, and not in the sort of endearing kind of way. You better look out, because if this person knows more about you, you could be in danger. Which, for those listening, happens to me at least way less often than one might think.
Sorry, 1 second. Did you hear that beeping?
Oh, what do you call it? The cuckoo clock went off. Let's talk a bit about getting to know people in a different way in terms of dating. So I have to ask you, you teased me with Sarah the Sad Wicked, and with a description like that, I have to know the story behind Sarah the Sad Wicked.
Sarah the Sad Wiccan was my first girlfriend ever. And she was, I feel like we met in a chat room. And of course, to this day, I have no idea who she actually was. She could be a man, who knows? And that doesn't really matter again. It's sort of I just remember the sort of emotion. She was very emotional and very sad. She felt very depressed. And it was sort of, actually in my life, I think I sort of sometimes attract those people because I'm sort of, I'm spiffy, right? I'm positive. I can carry the sort of sad part.
Exactly.
Which taught me to bury the sad part or be like, oh, I'm not allowed to be sad because I have to be happy for them, which isn't the right lesson. But with Sarah, that's sort of what our relationship was. It was just like we were both 14, and it was just like she was really miserable, but also like a Wiccan, and would tell me about that stuff, which I knew nothing about, but I thought it was cool. I feel like in hindsight, I think it was just sort of, she was similar to me as like, she hadn't like read Dr. Doom 2099. She was like a Wiccan, but she just sort of wanted to be one. But like, that's cool. That's half of it, right? Just saying like, oh, I'm Sarah the Wiccan.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever shared photos, like, because I know many times I would send fake photos of me. I never, very rarely sent a real photo. Maybe I did with her because it felt like this was the sort of, like I said, it was a relationship, kind of. It was sort of, there was no responsibility though, other than like, I'm going to be online anyway, talking with you and David. I think this is where my multitasking brain was really sharpened. You know, I was like, you know, have 8 windows, 8 conversations going on. And Sarah was one of them. And I was able to sort of, I guess, be an ear for her. I have no idea. I hope she's doing okay. Sarah, if you're out there, hit me up. That would be a trip. Yeah, if it's Han or Leia, it doesn't matter, like Goki says.
Yes, Han, Leia, if you probably know who you are based on the story, reach out to me sometime. You are missed.
Oh, and I think just the act of me being sort of a protector, or, you know, I think that was sort of like, ooh, I'm kind of the masculine, like it was feeding that part of myself too, of like, ooh, I'm the strong man. I never feel like that in quote unquote real life, but here I'm helping this person.
The superhero.
And like we would have like really intimate conversations, I think. And I think we did, I mean, I don't know, like we did have cyber sex is what I was going to say. But like, what is like that is so ridiculous to me because I knew nothing about real sex, and it would just be, I mean, it was like erotic fan fiction, basically. That's what it was. But even that is also writing and imagining, and it was fun. You know, it's just like, I don't know what to say. You know, you're like writing and looking up things on the internet.
Exactly. It's a skill.
Well, and like convincing people that like, you know what you're talking about. Like, that's what it was for me.
Exactly. Well, it also teaches you, you know, everybody says write from life, but writing's only half that. You also have to learn to write outside your experience, and being online helps you with that, because you can, if you really wanted, you can pretend to be somebody else, or you can, if you join a role-playing board, you act out the life of a single person, right? And that teaches you to sort of leave your head and enter somebody else's and really think about things differently.
What do you discover about yourself when you're doing that?
Oh man, yeah. I mean, you discover how many different facets of yourself that you have. You discover how easy it can be sometimes to get into another person's head, even if they're like, you know, the undisputed monarch of Liberia or something like that.
Yeah, the villain, right? Yeah, but like then we learn why Doom is the way.
Yeah, you sort of realize, well, yeah, I mean, this poor guy, he had a really difficult childhood, you know, like he had this sort of facial scarring going. His ego stems from people telling him he was nothing all his life. By role-playing, by writing in general, but by role-playing in particular, you really hone in onto this fictional identity, and you really get to like know and understand them. And that's part of the appeal of role-playing. Plus, you get to do it with other people, right? And you get to write in a really unique way that you don't do just by writing by yourself.
Well, it's basically empathy. That's what you're describing.
Yeah. There can be something cathartic about being the evil guy or the jerk, right? Because sometimes in real life, you know, things can tick you off. Like there are things you kind of like, you keep bottled up. And then through villains or morally shady characters, you can kind of unbottle it. You want to be like Henry Peter Gyrick. He's a total jerk. Like, lean into it.
I totally agree with that. And I often see myself as, I mean, I'm very hard on myself. And I paint myself as the villain most of the time. Maybe that is why, you know, even at 13, I was like, oh, okay, I'm Doom. I'm the bad guy here. But what I really loved, the most fun I ever had acting was in a show called De Colores, where they basically were like, okay, you're Michael Scott, but like sort of worse. You know, I was basically the white man villain. And, you know, like one scene, I come into the grocery store wearing a Black Panther costume and saying Wakanda forever. Like,
oh my gosh.
And it was so much fun, but also, like you said, cathartic, because like sometimes that's the awful white person that I feel like. But also I can understand that person, which is sort of where the shame comes from, or like I know that person, but also it's like, oh, I get to use this to basically take the piss out of this person. I am the butt of every joke, and that feels good in that scenario. In real life, I hate being embarrassed or the butt of a joke. Oh man, it just feels so good to get a laugh when you're the asshole in that scenario, because it's like, okay, they now know, they see the truth of this guy.
Yeah. Like especially in that context, since it's a fictional context, people's guards aren't up as much, so they see that and like, oh yeah, I know that guy.
So, it sounds like for you found a sense of community in school and online. For me, it was sort of mostly online until later. What was the community different, the ones that you'd have in, quote unquote real life than online? Or like, were you sort of scratching different itches?
Yeah. Because the one major difference was that despite the fact that I had a lot of friends and was really happy and comfortable back then in high school, I couldn't talk to them about comics. I didn't know a single comic book reader. I knew one guy who was like a casual reader, but he was more into like Star Wars. The internet was where I could finally talk about this passion, that I had stacks and stacks of in my room, and that scratched an itch that I had not been able to scratch since maybe ever. And that's why it was so important for me.
And that's what's so cool. All of a sudden it was like, oh, people like comic books here. This is great, and that was what we talked about forever, and it was also this safe place to then we would venture into more personal things, but it was sort of really about the hobby.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about Comic Castle. I realized this when putting together the outline for our episode. I was like, oh, is this just, and I even said, welcome to Comic Castle, like at the beginning. Is that what this is? Is that maybe I was the host, right? Like that was sort of what I was. I was the admin of Comic Castle. And now I guess I'm doing that again.
Yeah. How did it feel? Did you feel like you had this responsibility on your shoulders? Because, like, to me, you were like one of the most chill administrators ever. Like, it never felt like I was talking to like an admin superior, unless I was like, oh, can I get administrative privileges on the X-Men forum, But like, other than that, it felt like you were just like one of us, just like another poster.
When my PE teacher told me to join leadership, I didn't actually do that in real life, but I made a message board, and I guess I was kind of a leader in a way of that. I don't know. It's interesting. I think I was much more chill online. Like it was like all the times you're describing me, I was very chill and very cool. In real, I'm a anxious person, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that I had anxiety. It sort of only came to me when I was 20 and 30s that I realized like, oh, that's why I'm always nervous and always like have this pit in my stomach and feel antsy. But I guess I didn't have that about this. I was sort of, I was going to say the stakes were lower, but like it was really, I don't know if that's exactly true. It was sort of, I think I just felt comfortable. I sort of waited until my parents were asleep and my sister was asleep. And that was another thing. It was almost like a secret from them. Did you have any embarrassing moments online where sort of your identity as a kid or as not Goki, the real you, come out?
Yeah. I can only think of one, and it's pretty tame. After the Marvel message boards, when I first started going to the other boards, I let my first name slip, which at the time was a big deal. And I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I wasn't supposed to do that. So I immediately like, oh, that's not my name. My name is, I don't even remember. It was like, I said, it's Feldman, it's Rodney. I don't remember the fake one I said. Some of them kind of bought it. And then later on, when I got to know them better, I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure they're not trying to lure me into anything weird. I said, okay, my real name was what I said it was. And that's it. That's like the most embarrassing I ever got.
Yeah, that is pretty tame. But that's also indicative of where you were and that you were being, I think rightfully so, like private and safe. I feel like I do remember a ping of like learning your name and that being a big deal, like when you shared that with me. Because I think it did take a while. It's almost like an I love you in aim of sort of like, oh, I'm ready to tell you.
Maybe that was the sign. Like that was like, just the fact that I blurted out was like, okay, like I'm comfortable. These guys are safe. And maybe that's my brain, my subconscious telling me that.
I think that's true. The one that I remember And it's also tame, but I just remember having a lot of embarrassment because it was just so obvious that I was a child. I was on the Cinema Blend, like what became the Cinema Blend like website. So it's a big deal now for like movie reviews and movie news and stuff. And I was like one of the main people, I think, on it. And I feel like I was one of the I feel like I was cool. You know, I don't think I was a moderator, but I was like, you know, one of the big posters on there. And there was a guy who loved the Blue Beetle. And he, to me, was the coolest guy. He was hilarious, confident, and he was my favorite, like, basically poster. And I think that would happen where, like, you would basically look up to these people and you could tell that, like, okay, this guy's older, or, like, he's like, oh, I want to be this guy, right? Like, I was sort of idolizing the Blue Beetle. I think that even might have been his name. I'm not sure. But I remember basically I did a post where I just shared a bunch of Blue Beetle photos as a gift to him. I was just like, so like, oh, here, I found all these like cool Blue Beetle photos. And then I remember I posted it and then everyone responded in sort of like but it was like very obvious. Like, I think he was like sort of embarrassed for me and also like, oh, thank you. I can just Google too. Although I don't know if Google was what it was, but it was sort of like, why are you doing this? And it was sort of this like embarrassing like token of affection that sort of outed me as like, oh, this is a kid. And I think I never recovered in feeling comfortable at that message board again. Later in life, I was like, oh man, if I hadn't done that, I might have been like a reporter for Cinema Blend right now.
Oh,
you know, when I was,
that was what ended it, really?
I think I just felt so embarrassed. I was just like, oh no. And it was embarrassing. Like, I think the reaction to it was sort of, I don't think I was necessarily made fun of, but it was just like, whoa, you know, that's weird, you know, kind of a thing.
Yeah. You know, what you made me think of, I spent time working at a school for a while, and you made me think of when kids like give you drawings and stuff like that, you know, that was your version of that.
Yeah, no, it totally was. Like, I look up to this person and here's me sharing that, but it was in it was an embarrassing way. And also like, we weren't like talking outside of the message board. So it was sort of like it came out of left field. I think if it was like you or something and I did it, you would have been nice enough to be like, oh, this is so cool. Yay. You know, Goki photos or whatever. Whereas he was just like, oh, I didn't know you had like a crush on me, basically. Yeah. Like, it's kind of how it happened. And I was just like, oh, I guess I do have a crush on you. And now I feel like I can't be myself anymore. Bye.
Especially when you're young, because you were, maybe 13, 14 at that point? Like, you still wanted to get, like, kids are really into getting people's approval, you know? Like, but again, working at a school, like, they always wanted to give me stuff to show me what they were doing. Yeah, I think it's very endearing, especially now having worked in that environment. I understand it even better. I'm like, so that's why we do that stuff when we're kids, you know? And it's too bad that they didn't have, I mean, I assume that a lot of them were not parents yet, that they didn't have that knowledge to sort of see, oh, this is just a kid expressing his admiration for an older person. Right. I am still that kid who wants appreciation and validation. I think who isn't, right? Yeah, that's like what, you know, a writing thing. That's what the podcast is. You know, like I'm living and dying on someone's opinion, right? Yeah. I care about what people think. And, you know, and I would like to pretend I don't. But that's clearly why I would be pretending online, you know, and not doing it in high school. But, like, I still do feel like that kid who, like, has a bunch of photos for someone, right? That is endearing. You know, if someone did that for me, I would be... It's so funny, man. Like, I even sent you a picture of June 2099 for your birthday. I'm like, wow, you never read one of his comics. I can't believe it. I still loved it. Oh, thank you. That's, I think, where I wanted to sort of circle us back, maybe toward where we're heading back into the station. You know, Heimdall is going to bring us back here. And I wanted to, ask you, what was your setup like? Where were you during all of our conversations? What was your fortress of solitude? Well, at first it was like my parents' computer, because I would also use it to do homework, you know, so none of that stuff was like mine. And then eventually I got a laptop because like, I started needing like extra time for stuff in school, and one of the permissions was that I could use a laptop to take notes in class. So the laptop became sort of like my later place. So it all really depended on like what desk I was on. Like sometimes it was at like the dining room table, sometimes it was on the kitchen table. My room, all my tables are like covered with stuff, right? So I couldn't really actually use the computer there. So it was always like somewhere in the house, just not in my room, you know? So yeah, like it actually seems indicative of you. Like you're sort of bouncing around and we're sort of more open.
Mine was only in one place, and it's not like it was in the living room in the corner. It was the family's computer.
Right.
And I think that was sort of why I would always be on later after everyone was asleep. So like no one would be wanting the computer. And back then it was only one computer in the house. I did have a computer in my room, but it didn't have the internet. That was where I wrote erotic X-Men fan fiction for sure, which was a lot of fun. I wish I still had those because God, they'd be cool.
I don't even know what kind of double entendre jokes you can tell anymore with that.
For me, it was like I was thinking about like how the powers, their superpowers and abilities would interact during intercourse, basically. But it was also sort of this like teaching. It was academy, right? The school for gifted youngsters. So it was just sort of like the teachers and the students, and it was definitely like some sort of weird fantasy on that level too, I guess, or like the older, younger. But yeah, it was definitely just me having no idea what I was writing about.
Yeah, dude, that's also like figuring out like how their powers factor in. That's such a Grant Morrison thing. Spoilers for those who haven't read a 20-year comic series. Cyclops has a psychic affair with Emma Frost, right? It's completely telepathic. They use basically Emma's telepathy as a way to like have an affair without making it actually physical. It's just amazing how ahead of its time that idea was. And by extension, how ahead of its time your fanfic was.
I don't think it was ahead of its time, Goki. You're too kind as always. Well, so I want to circle back to sort of where we are now. Like I mentioned at the beginning, Facebook opened the portal of like, we saw what we looked like. We sort of kept in tabs of each other's lives. Once college hit, even before that, I think senior year of high school, like when I basically came out of my shell and quote unquote real life, I did it was almost like quitting cold turkey. And doing this now with you, I'm just like, man, why? I wish I could have kept on going a little bit, but I think I had to go into all in on college, right? Or something like that.
Totally.
I don't know. How has your like sort of internet and the message board journey progressed or gone since we stopped talking every night?
For a little bit, it was still kind of business as usual because, in addition to Comic Castle, I had the role-playing stuff going on. Right. So that's when I joined like that DC message board. Like by then, like CC4 was a very recent memory. And then in like 2009, that message board closed. And after that, role playing just became a lot more haphazard for me, because I was in college too. And I was like, I have to not fail. So it was getting a little harder to manage the RP hobby. And then when I entered college, 2004, it was like, that was when Facebook became public to colleges, right? So that I was in it from that really early stage. It's definitely different. Being my real self on social media it's not as liberating, and especially now, it's just not as fun. And it's nice that even when we connected on social media as our real names, I still feel like my online self when I talk to you, and the same goes with all my online friends.
It didn't change at all. I think it was sort of. There isn't a difference. It was imagined in my head the whole time, Goki. and I actually had this thought that, when I went to college, I had the Comic Castle experience. I actually was connecting with people. I met people who read comics and they loved them. They were just getting into it. And it was sort of the reverse. I had sort of stopped, and then I was sort of like, they dragged me back in, but I was able to give them sort of the knowledge of the previous few years. It was sort of like that role reversal where I felt like I was the newbie, but now it sort of felt like I was this like the old wizened wizard coming back for one final adventure.
That's so cool.
But what was cool was like, oh, I can like whatever I want in college, and I will find the people that like it too. And it felt like I didn't know how to do that in high school. Have you met anyone in person, that you met online?
I have, in fact. Yes, sir. I have met two people. One who I don't think she really minds if I use her real name, but I'll just use the name of that I first knew her by, Rogue Sugar, and right. And I met her and her husband, who was also a role player. At that point, we first met on an X-Men role playing board. And then we went to the DC board, and she was like Zatanna and Black Canary, and he was the Flash, the former Impulse, who had become the Flash at that time. They came to my hometown. And the thing is that, when it comes to your hometown, lots of times you end up not seeing your local sites as much as people who are visiting. So I was like, I had only been to like the major areas twice in my life. So they ended up being like better tour guides than me, and I just felt so embarrassed. Rogue and I, we had such a great chemistry online. We were just joking all the time, and it was the same in person. It was such an extension of that, and it's just so surreal talking about things online that happen online, because when you talk about them with another online person, it's like talking about, talking with friends at school about what you did that day. It feels surprisingly natural.
I feel like probably most people, probably more often than not, works. Like the chemistry you have is real.
Yeah.
I think there's and I'll speak to the one that I had, and that was David, the one that we've talked about, because he invited me to his wedding. And I met him there at the airport. He had a cardboard cutout that said "Spiffy Guy" when he was waiting for me. And I think at that point we definitely were on Facebook, so it wasn't like a shock of like what we looked like, but it was definitely like far bigger one than it would be now seeing you. I mean, especially now that we've done this Zoom. I mean, it was amazing, because he was sort of like, he ushered me into his life on like the biggest weekend of his life. And, I was crashing at his place up until like the night of the wedding. And then I was hoisted off to another friend, understandably. But it was like really cool. Basically, I got to know all of his friends and his life sort of. And I was kind of like a tourist. It sort of felt weird because like I didn't know anyone else. I didn't know the touchstones. I didn't really know David's real life. I knew the stuff that he cared about, the passions. So yeah, it was sort of cool being in there, but everyone was very welcoming. And I remember being dragged into like this song that like all of his guy friends sang together. It was clearly like a thing that they all did, and they dragged me in and was like, Andy, come on in, you got to do it. I also remember chicken tenders.
I feel kind of guilty now, because you two were talking about how you didn't know anybody. You would have known one person. I almost even bought a ticket, went to the wedding.
Oh man, I think so because you were invited?
I was invited. Yeah, he invited me and everything. And like, it was a stupid thing. Like, I don't remember if I forgot what time it was or if I overslept or whatever, but I missed the flight. And I was like, I feel so guilty. I was like curled up in bed, like, why? I said, David, I'm so sorry. He's like, haha, it's okay. He's like, I'll buy you something up from the wedding registry. Go right ahead. And that was that.
Oh man, that would have been cool to see you. But also, it was kind of overwhelming experience with just meeting David. So I could only imagine it's like, oh God, there's two people.
I know. Yeah, right. Exactly. Like, I was feeling that too. Even when I bought the ticket, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to meet two people I know, but kind of don't know at the same time. And I'm going to meet all these people who I have no connection to at all.
Yeah. It's just a surreal experience. And you still are worried that like, oh, maybe they won't like real me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's sort of like the fear. Like maybe they think I'm loud. Maybe they think I'm weird. Maybe they like don't like my hair. Like.
I don't know. It's just a cool experience, and I'm not sure very many people have the opportunity. Yeah. And so I am sort of proud of that, and I'm excited to cross another off the list. Let's see each other in person this summer on my road trip. Let's do it.
Please do. Head over to my neck of the woods. Now listeners, you now know that it's drivable.
I think if anything, this is me reaching out was like, okay, I want to rekindle this relationship. I mean, it's not like we were separated or whatever, but it's just like, I want to do this more. And I'm really happy that you were on board. And my question to you is like, how can we be better friends going forward? Or what do you need from me? Or what do you appreciate in a friendship?
Man, I guess it's acceptance, and that really comes back to like the central theme of what this has all been about, right? Being online, we found a way to be accepted in a way that we weren't in real life. And honestly, like for me, when it comes to you, no expectations. You're already a great friend. You're so supportive. Like this whole process when we were preparing this podcast, you were just like so kind and generous. And even before when we started getting back in touch, like around the time you got married, you're just so generous. And so all I can say is just keep being you.
Oh, Goki. And that's why I was online all those hours, because I did feel accepted. I did, and also appreciated. I think that was sort of like, I feel so appreciated by you in this conversation, and it's not, and vice versa. it sounds like. And that's amazing. I think that's what you don't want it to feel one way. I'm always wary of feeling like people are like I'm taking people for granted or taking friends for granted, and I think sometimes it can be easy to do that or it can seem that way. Because I think a lot of times, at least for me, I spend a lot of time thinking about people, maybe not always talking about them, and it's hard to do that. And I really want to, whenever I reach out to you, it's like, I need to have time to do it and to do it properly. And I think you've always sort of maybe understood that. And I think I have more been hard on myself, of course, of being like, oh man, I haven't reached out to Goki in 7 months. What is wrong with me? I think exactly what you said, acceptance. And I accept you and your glorious hair. I don't know what you're talking about with your Goki, you and David and that part of my life. I think I don't have friends that are older than that, which is really cool. And it's awesome that it still works.
I know. And the thing is, like, it's funny. I keep in touch with so many people from my online days, in many ways better than other people I knew at that age. It's one of those things where, like, if I don't hear from you in a while, I'm like, oh, well, that's okay. Because, I'm sure I'll hear from him eventually.
That makes a lot of sense, because that's sort of, we're built for keeping in touch the way we, on social media or the internet, because that's how we always did.
Exactly.
So it's never been any different. Like if you meet someone in college and then move away, you're not used to keeping in touch with that person. But for us, it's like, oh, we've never actually met. So nothing has really changed.
Exactly. This is like a really good way to meet people when you think about it, because you get to know the person's personality first, right? And then when you meet them in person, you're just filling in like little blanks as if it were Mad Lib. Most of the structure is there. Like most of what you know of the person, you already know about.
I think it's now just time to say farewell and thank you so much for being Heimdall, for bringing us back to this magic moment.
It has been a pleasure exploring the 7 realms and walking through the Bifrost with you and catching up on all this stuff. It always holds a special place in my heart. Let's do this again sometime. Podcast in person, it doesn't matter. This has been a real treat for me too.
I'm so grateful to Goki for joining me and to you all for listening to our conversation. Looking back now, it's clear how much I needed Spiffy Guy, Dr. Doom 2099, and why I needed the separate online identity, how much I needed Goki, AA, and Comic Castle. We built a community to feel safe, and I'm not sure I was able to properly express how much Goki meant to me here. Once college hit, I took this time of my life, this community, for granted. The support and positive reinforcement I received from Goki and beyond. There are few places that I've received that level of acceptance before and since. 20 years later, I'm still that kid trying to build a community where everyone can feel safe, no matter their identity. It's a work in progress. You can find the soundtrack to Goki's life and all other past guest soundtracks on the Naked Man Spotify page. Please rate and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tell all your friends and cyber buddies. And if you want to join our community, follow us on Instagram at NakedManPod, and don't hesitate to reach out to us at nakedmanpod@gmail.com. Better yet, give us a call at 747-231-7120 and share your thoughts and feelings with us. What was your AIM screen name? Where did you spend your time during the golden age of the internet? Have you met an online friend in person? Let us know. Next time on the Naked Man Pod, I invite my friend Marianne Tangy to discuss wanderlust, that never-ending desire to run away, to explore, and the independence and loneliness that comes out of that. In the meantime, as my dad always says, be sweet. This episode of the Naked Man Podcast was conceived by Andy Green in collaboration with Goki. The Naked Man is a podcast hosted, created, and produced by me, Andy Green. All music was composed by Robert Panico, and all graphics were created by Christopher Miles.
Nothing will ever be the same again!